I came across this article from The Guardian, which is a newspaper in Britain, and I thought it illustrated pretty dramatically some of the things I was talking about the drift of European and American culture. I was talking about creative autonomy. My body is my own. I can do what I want with my body. The existential ethics that I mentioned several times throughout the week. The only demand that I have is that I be my authentic self. And at least in popular thought, this is equated with my desires. The imperative of my life is to act on my desires and realize all my desires. The article in the Guardian, the headline of the article is "Immoral to advise family and friends on life choices," says Cambridge philosopher. And then the subheading, "Self-authorship is a right," argues Farbod Akalagi, he's the Cambridge philosopher. "And people should make their own decisions on new jobs or having children." And then a few paragraphs of the article. "Giving friends and relations advice about crucial life choices, such as whether to take a new job or start a family, is immoral, according to a new paper by a Cambridge professor. Dr. Farbod Akalagi, a moral philosopher at Christ College, argues that everyone has a right to self-authorship. So he must make choices about transformative experiences for themselves. In a new paper for the Philosophy Journal Analysis, he argues that this right to revelatory autonomy, that's his phrase, revelatory autonomy. Autonomy means, etymologically means self-law. I am a law to myself. Revelatory autonomy is violated even by well-meaning advice from friends and family about crucial life decisions. He argues that it is impossible to know if a friend's life will benefit from a transformative experience until after the event. It is for them to find out, and they have to make those choices deliberately. So it's wrong to seek advice, because then you're inhibiting your right to self-authorship. You create yourself. You create your own story. It's wrong to receive advice and be guided by somebody else. It's also immoral to try to give advice and to direct somebody to do what you think is best for them. All kinds of things wrong with that, obviously. No place for any kind of authority. You can't have somebody who has authority over you who can direct you. If everyone has a right to self-authorship, then they have a right to make their own decisions regardless of anything. Again, it's bound up with this existentialist ethics and this idea of autonomy that is so pervasive in Western culture. But this is a Cambridge professor, so this is obviously one of the top universities in Britain, one of the top universities in the world. This is a professor of moral philosophy who's making this argument. And it's very consistent with the premises that he has. If you have the premise of moral autonomy, then yeah, it's wrong to receive advice and submit to anyone else's authority. You can make your own self, create your own self. An earlier vision, I think a couple things occurred to me. I don't remember the exact phrasing, but in John Milton's Paradise Lost, do you know that poem? At least the name of it. John Milton was a 17th century Puritan poet, and he wrote a very long epic poem about the fall, the creation and fall of man, called Paradise Lost. And in that, Satan is a major character. Satan leads a rebellion of angels against God, and then Satan, of course, tempts Eve and Adam, and the fall is the result of that temptation. But self-authorship is he doesn't use exactly that term, but that's his aspiration. He wants to be an author of himself. Satan does. Milton recognizes that there is this temptation to try to make ourselves by ourselves without any authority, that we're completely autonomous and completely a self-law. But he sees it as a demonic and satanic temptation. It's the kind of temptation that Satan presents to Adam and Eve in the garden. You will be as gods. You can make yourself gods. The phrase "author of myself" is actually found in one of Shakespeare's plays, in the play Coriolanus. Coriolanus is a Roman general who is treated with contempt by the Romans. He wins all the battles, but he's a very arrogant person, and so there are people in Rome that hate Coriolanus, even though he's saved the city several times. And so Coriolanus leaves Rome and goes and becomes a soldier in the army of the enemies who are attacking Rome. Can't remember what the people are, what this group is called that he associates with. Anyway, at one point he says he's going to stand as if I were author of myself. Of course, Shakespeare sees that as a tragic stance, and Coriolanus ends up being killed by the soldiers that he's defected to. He eventually agrees not to attack Rome, and the other army hacks him to death. So the stance of being author of yourself, Coriolanus is acting as if Rome has given him nothing. He's the one who saved Rome. His family has given him nothing. He wants to be author of himself. There's nothing from outside that's contributed to who he is. But again, Shakespeare sees that as a tragic stance that leads to disaster. But that's the mentality that's behind a great deal of European and American thinking. Again, I don't know how widespread that kind of idea is, but if you're locked in or if you're connected to Western thought through social media, through the internet, then these ideas are infiltrating, and these are things that you're going to have to deal with. I suspect you're going to have to deal with these kind of ideas as pastors. You have to resist these kind of ideas in yourself. That's partly a background to what I want to say about the seventh word, thou shalt not commit adultery. I started out talking about sexual morality in the Western world today. I want to say a few words in addition to that. There's been a kind of a radical turn in the last 30 or 40 years that I think is worth commenting on. That's one thing I want to talk about. The second thing I want to talk about under the seventh word is the fact that in the Bible, sexual behavior is a matter of public concern. There are public rules. It's not just a matter of private morality. It's a matter of public concern, and I think that's still the case, even though we're no longer under the law. The third thing I want to talk about is the theological dimension of marriage and sexuality, because that's really the depth dimension of marriage and sexuality. You have to regulate marriage and sexuality in order to maintain an orderly society. As one Robert Jensen, I mentioned Robert Jensen earlier this week. The Lutheran theologian Robert Jensen says, no society can tolerate a shapelessness in sexuality, just everybody doing what's right in his own eyes sexually. No society can persist if that's the way people behave. But that's not the deepest reality of marriage and sexuality. The deepest reality is a theological one. So I want to close with that. So first of all, I was talking about the creative autonomy, sexual autonomy as I can do what I like with my body. I can sleep with whomever I want. My desires can't be inhibited by anyone outside me. And that's taken a more radical turn. That's pretty radical, but it's taken an even more radical turn in the last several decades. First of all, theoretically, among feminist theorists, particularly Judith Butler. Judith Butler is I think she's an American, she may be British. She's a feminist philosopher who has argued that gender is not attached in any way to biological sex. She'll acknowledge that there is such a thing as biological sex. We have male or female bodies. We have male or female genetics. She acknowledges that. But she makes a distinction between biological sex and gender. And gender for her is not tied in at all to biological sex. Gender is, for what her term is, performative. Gender is completely performative. Gender is what you do and how you behave rather than what you are biologically. You shouldn't be tied down. This is, again, the creative autonomy taken to in an extreme way. You shouldn't be tied down to your own biological self. Not only are you supposed to be free from all external influence, any kind of authority or advice, you have to free yourself from your own body. Your body tells you you're male, but that shouldn't determine whether you act male or not. Gender is completely performative. So part of what she's saying is you can see there's a kind of persuasiveness at one level. Virtually every society recognizes some difference between male and female in dress, in certain kinds of behavior. Expectations of male and female are different in most societies, but the way that that difference is symbolized varies a great deal. Okay. In some societies, in the U.S. prior to, I don't know, the middle of the 20th century probably, in the U.S. and Europe, men wore trousers, pants, women wore dresses, and you could distinguish male and female just by looking at the form of the clothing. That's no longer the case. Women wear slacks, pants, pants in the American sense. Anyway, I won't go into that. Pants in the American sense. Trousers, if you're thinking in British English. Women do, and I mean some men wear kind of robes or what looks like a dress, and they're not. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're transvestites. And I mean you have that in traditional societies. Men wear robes, different kinds of robes than women. So Butler begins from that observation that there's a variety in the way these sexual differences are presented, but she goes to an extreme in saying that there's no fixed. The biological sex does not in any way determine how that should be manifested in your performance of gender. And so if you act like a man, you're a man. If you act like a woman, you're a woman. If you if you put on women's clothing, I don't know if do you have TikTok? Is TikTok available here in Ethiopia? Okay, get rid of it. On TikTok, you have there's some fairly prominent. I mean, I don't want to go on a rabbit hole, but just before the recent election in the United States, Joe Biden sat down with a TikTok celebrity who is a man who has gone through a gender transition. I think he probably has had surgeries to become physically a woman, but also just dresses and acts kind of in a stereotyped, not just female, but girly. The guy's, I'm guessing the guy is in his 20s, but he acts like a teenage girl on TikTok. But he's performing femininity as he understands it, and therefore he's a woman. You have to treat him as a woman. Even though if you took a blood test, every one of the cells of his body would indicate that he's male. He's a male human being, but is performing femininity. In the biblical picture, of course, male and female are gifts of God by virtue of creation. God created man male and female. That's elaborated in Genesis 2. Adam is created first alone, and then the Lord builds a woman, a suitable partner for him, an ally. The phrase that's translated as help meet. That's kind of a distortion of what the King James Version means. What the King James Version means is a helper that's suitable, a help meet for him. The King James that used that phrase doesn't mean help meet as one word. So the phrase that's translated that way means something like opposite. It's a combination of a preposition in Hebrew that means like or similarity, but the word that the preposition is attached to means something like opposite. So it combines both difference and similarity. So God created man, male, and female. That male or femaleness is inscribed on our bodies. Apart from some genetic deformities, you do have babies born that have ambiguous sexual organs. And you can't tell just by looking at them whether they're male or female. But you can tell because you can do other kinds of tests. And none of these genetic deformities are some third thing. They're either male or female, and they just have something happened in the process of growth within the uterus that made them deformed. So God made us male and female in all normal cases, apart from these fairly rare examples of genetic deformities. That's clear from the body. God created our bodies kind of as a physical sign of who we are. When Roman Catholics talk about this kind of thing. And Roman Catholics have written some very good things on the question of sexuality. They use the word sacramental. The body is a sacramental sign of your identity as male or female. Each of the sexes, male and female, has his or her own particular gifts and powers. Okay? There is an order of male and female, but it's not that both of them are in the image of God. Men are given certain powers and responsibilities. Women have certain powers that men don't have. Most obviously, you could enumerate others, but most obviously women have the power to grow little human beings inside them, which is a pretty amazing power. The human race would not persist very long without that feminine female power to receive a male semen and to gestate new human beings until they're born as new human beings. It's miraculous. So God has created man, male, and female. He's created male and female for each other. Each has its own particular powers, its own particular glories, but these are to be harmonized. Because of sin, they aren't harmonized. As I've talked about already this week, in Genesis 3, the first effect of sin is to estrange Adam and Eve from each other. Even before the Lord shows up, they're already kind of estranged from each other. They're no longer naked and not ashamed in each other's presence. Being in the other's presence naked brings shame after the fall. So they make fig leaves to cover themselves. So there is an estrangement, but the original created aim is that there's a harmony of the powers of male and female. Males are dependent on females, females are dependent on males. There's a mutuality and a reciprocity between the two. And again, that's inscribed and evident in our bodies. Again, this is something that John Paul II was the Pope back in the late 20th century. John Paul II gave a series of addresses at the Vatican on the question of sexuality and what he called the theology of the body. And that's been published as a very large book called Man and Woman, He Created Them. The phrase that John Paul II uses is that we each have a spousal body. Men are given bodies that physically fit with a woman's body. A woman's body physically fits with a male body. And you can tell from, the Bible indicates this, but you can tell from just the physical form of the male and female body that they're designed for each other, that they're designed to have this kind of reciprocal relationship with each other and to be in harmony with each other. One of the places where this is brought out most explicitly in the Bible is in 1 Corinthians 11. I'm not going to, don't ask me about head coverings because I don't know what to do with the head coverings. But this is the head covering passage. Beginning verse 3. I want you to understand that Christ is head of every man. The man is head of the woman. So there is an order of male and female. There's a kind of hierarchy that's built in. God is the head of Christ. Every man who has something on his head while praying or prophesying disgraces his head. But every woman who has her head uncovered while praying or prophesying disgraces her head. For she is one and the same with her whose head is shaved. For a woman does not cover her head, let her also have her hair cut off. But if it is disgraceful for a woman to have her hair cut off or shaved, let her cover her head. For a man ought to have his head covered since he is the image and glory of God, but the woman is the glory of man. This is the part that I want to focus on. A man does not originate from woman, but from woman from man. He's talking about Eve being created from Adam. The first woman exists by being taken from Adam. The first woman is built from Adam's rib. For indeed, man was not created for woman's sake, but woman for the man's sake. Woman is created to be a helper suitable to the man. Therefore, the woman ought to have a symbol of authority on the head because of the angels. However, in the Lord, neither is woman independent of man, nor is man independent of woman. Or the word is actually without. Woman is not without man, man is not without woman. For as the woman originates from the man, so man also has his birth through the woman, and all things originate from God. So again, in verse 12, the first part of that is talking about Genesis 2. The woman originates from the man, but every man since, you started your life inside a woman's body. Everyone has. So men and women originate from the woman. I don't think Paul's making a comment about the biology of conception. I've been reading a bit about this, and it's kind of astonishing to me that it wasn't until like the 19th century that there was a real understanding of how conception happened. There were all kinds of weird theories. I mean, they knew that it was through sexual union between a man and they knew that. Everybody knew that from fairly early on. But how it works biologically was not understood until fairly recently. So I don't think Paul's making a comment about the biology of conception, but he's saying that every man has his birth through the woman. Every one of you is dependent on a woman. You would not be alive if your mother had not carried you, if you had not been nourished by her body. I don't know if you continued to be nourished by her body after you were born. Our children were breastfed, so for the first year or so, they continued to depend on my wife's body to continue to live. Okay? So that's what Paul's getting at. So there's this kind of reciprocity in origin. A woman comes from man, but for every man since has come from a woman. I think the point too that Paul makes, that the woman is the glory of the man. I think that's an important phrase for describing what's happening in Genesis 2 and for understanding the relationship between male and female. A man is the image and glory of God. I don't think Paul is denying that woman is also the image and glory of God. But there's also this relationship between the man and the woman, that the woman is the glory of the man. The woman is the radiance of the glory of the man. Or, as the Proverbs sometimes say, the woman is the crown. A wise woman is the crown of her husband, glorifying him. There may also be something about the particular beauty and glory of a woman, the glory of the man. One of my good friends says that Eve is humanity 2.0, okay? An upgrade in humanity. You get humanity, Adam is humanity 1.0, then when Eve is made is humanity 2.0, the glory of man, and kind of an enhanced man. So I think there's an important truth in that. Okay, so that's the first point I want to make. We could go on at greater length with that, but just these issues I think are already on the agenda for the churches in the U.S. and Europe because of the radical turn of sexual morality in those places. You may be facing that in the future, so you need to be thinking about the biblical picture of male and female and how they're related, and particularly, I mean, the baseline is that in the Bible, male and female are different. That difference is irreducible. That difference is inscribed on the body, and yet male and female are dependent on one another, mutually dependent, and are created to live in harmony. The second point I want to make about the seventh word is that in the Old Testament, sexual behavior is not a private concern. That's again something that's been very popular in the last half century or so in the Western Europe, in Europe and the U.S. Maybe it's longer than that, but the idea that sexual activity is a matter of private concern. So the state doesn't have anything to say about what's happening in my bedroom, who I'm sleeping with, what I'm doing in my bed with another person. The church doesn't have anything to say to that private zone. Sexuality is a purely private zone. I can do what I want within that. It's another expression of this creed of autonomy. But it's clear in the Pentateuch that sexual perversity is not only a sin, but treated as a crime. Leviticus 20 is the most obvious place. It's the place where this is most thoroughly summarized. I read some passages from Leviticus 18 yesterday afternoon. Leviticus 18 talks about different kinds of sexual sin and declares that there are abominations or diversities. It forbids certain kinds of relations between close blood relations. So it prohibits incest. It prohibits homosexual acts. It prohibits bestiality. And then you flip over a couple chapters and you basically have the same set of sins, but now there are penalties attached, and that's in Leviticus 20. So I'll read a few verses of this. I mean, you get the flavor pretty quickly. If there's a man who commits adultery with another man's wife, one who commits adultery with his friend's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall be put to death. Adultery was a capital crime. If there is a man who lies with his father's wife, this is a kind of incest, he has uncovered his father's nakedness. Both of them shall be put to death. Their blood guiltiness is upon them. So that's a man with his father's wife, whether it's his mother or it's a stepmother. And then the next verse is relation between a man and the generation below him. If there's a man who lies with his father's wife, he has uncovered his... Oh, no, sorry, I just read that. If there's a man who lies with his daughter-in-law, verse 12, both of them shall surely be put to death. They have committed incest. Their blood guiltiness is upon them. Verse 13, if there's a man who lies with a male, as those who lie with a woman, both of them have committed a detestable act. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood guiltiness is upon them. Verses 15 and 16, if there's a man who lies with an animal, he shall surely be put to death. You shall kill the animal also. If there's a woman who approaches any animal to mate with it, you shall kill the woman and the animal. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood guiltiness is upon them. Okay. So various sexual sins are in the Pentateuch, in the law, treated as public crimes that have to be punished, that should be punished by death. Okay. Not everything is punished by death. We'll talk about the punishments for theft a little bit later this morning. Punishment, if you steal something, you're not liable to the death penalty. But if you murder someone, you're liable to the death penalty. If you break the Sabbath in particular ways, you're liable to the death penalty. If you blaspheme God, that's a capital crime. If you curse parents, that can be a capital crime. And these forms of sexual sins in the Old Testament are capital crimes. Of course, you have to put this in the full context. This isn't to minimize the severity of these punishments. So by severity, I'm not criticizing it. They are severe punishments. But you have to put that in context. What has to happen before a man is convicted of adultery? Man and woman are convicted of adultery. According to the biblical standard, there has to be testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. Where are you going to find the 2 or 3 witnesses? You can't just punish somebody for any crime in ancient Israel without some kind of testimony and evidence. And so it's not like, and I don't think the picture is not like a police force in ancient Israel scrutinizing, surveilling everyone's bedroom to see who they're sleeping with. There has to be some charge, like the husband of the woman. He might know that his wife committed adultery, but he can't. If he can't bear witness to that in some kind of explicit kind of eyewitness fashion, then punishment can't be carried out. But even given that, these are very stern punishments. God takes these sins as offenses against Israel's life as a people. They're public sins, not just private wrongs. Now, I think the first application of this, how do these apply in the New Covenant? The first application is within the church. The church doesn't have the power of the sword. The church can't execute people. But the church should discipline people who commit these kinds of sexual sins to the point of excommunication. I don't think it's an automatic excommunication if you find somebody in your church that's committed adultery and it's proven that they committed adultery. Perhaps they confess to it. I don't think that it's necessary that you go to this extent of excommunication, but they should be subject to church discipline of some sort. They should be exhorted, or perhaps they're cut off from the Lord's table for a time. If somebody's impenitent in one of these sexual sins, then as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 5, you cast them out to Satan. I've talked about this. I think I talked about this week. Did I? 1 Corinthians 5, Paul quotes from Deuteronomy, purge the wicked man from among you. In Deuteronomy, that's talking about the death penalty. But in 1 Corinthians 5, it's talking about excommunication. So the first application of these rules is in the church, and that means that the church has an interest and oversees the sexual lives of its members. That doesn't mean that you're, again, invading bedrooms. It doesn't mean that you have hidden cameras in every member's bedroom to make sure that they're not, probably they're not committing adultery in their own bedroom. It's not that kind of scrutiny, but the rulers of the church, pastors and other rulers of the church, have oversight of the sexual behavior of their members, properly so. They can't; those sexual sins, sexual behavior cannot be treated as a purely private matter in the church. And I would argue that the thrust of Scripture is to say that these kinds of sexual sins should also be matters of civil law, as they are here in Ethiopia and other countries in Africa. That's not the case of the United States anymore. Up until the 1990s, many states still had laws that punished homosexual acts. But the Supreme Court of the United States overturned those in the early 1990s. And so there's no state now that can have any kind of legal penalty, civil penalty, for homosexual acts. But that's, as I understand, that's still the case in Ethiopia, and I know it is in other African countries, that homosexual acts are punishable by law. I think that I think that's right. That should be done, and I think it should be defended. Well, partly from the things that I've just been saying, although we're not under these laws of ancient Israel, but that sets a kind of pattern. It gives us an insight into how civil authorities in the New Covenant should treat these sins. You can also think about, more generally, about what sexuality is, what sex is, and its relation to society's concerns in general. Society can only perpetuate itself by reproduction, right? Ethiopia will continue to exist in the future only if Ethiopians have children. Kenya will continue to exist only if Kenyans have children. I mean, you can make up for not having children by bringing in immigrants and stuff, but they won't be Ethiopians. So Ethiopia can exist as a people only by reproduction, and that's a huge concern for any society. How are we going to continue past this generation? Is there going to be another generation of Ethiopians, and another and another and another? Reproduction is essential to the survival of a society, and obviously reproduction happens through sexual contact between men and women, okay, through sexual intercourse. So sexual intercourse comes within the purview, it's within the jurisdiction of civil authorities. You want your society to flourish. Your society can flourish in the long run only if people reproduce. And so you want the reproducing sexual behavior is something that has to be a public concern. I'm borrowing an argument again from Robert Jensen in the second volume of his Systematic Theology, and he says something like that: society's future depends on what happens in the bedroom. Therefore, what happens in the bedroom is of the most urgent interest to society. It can't be treated as just a private matter. It has to be recognized as a public concern. And again, I quoted this already, but he says that no society can endure mere shapelessness with regard to sex. Everybody doing whatever they please sexually. That's intolerable for any society. A society has to have certain kinds of norms that channel people's sexuality and sexual desires into socially approved and socially beneficial pathways. And it does that perhaps through penalties for certain kinds of behavior, like penalties for homosexual acts, civil penalties. I don't know what the penalty is here in Ethiopia, but civil penalties are an appropriate way. Also, just promoting a sexual norm, in the way that laws that encourage people to get married and have children within marriage. Public statements from the government that would encourage people to have sex within marriage and to have children within marriage. Encouragement through cultural means. What gets what kind of sexuality gets promoted through television programs or music. That's a concern for public authorities. So all of that to make the basic point that sexuality cannot be simply a private concern. It's properly within the view of civil authorities. The last thing I want to say about the seventh word, "Thou shalt not commit adultery," has to do with the theological dimension of it. I've been talking about just now social importance of sexual faithfulness, the social importance of sexuality being directed toward monogamous married sexuality. That's the only legitimate biblical form of sexuality, biblical expression of sexuality. A man and a woman having sex within the bonds of marriage. It's the only thing the Bible permits. And society should be encouraging that. And it's for the good of society that that's encouraged. But the deepest dimension of sexuality and infidelity and sexual perversion is not social and political, but theological. Marriage is a natural type. It's a natural symbol of Christ and the church. In the Old Covenant, it's a natural symbol of Yahweh and his people Israel. My reason for saying what I'm contrasting that to, you might think that God created marriage as just a natural institution for the purpose of propagating children. And then on top of that, there's a theological thing. God created this natural thing and says, that natural institution, that natural relation kind of resembles my relation with the church. So that natural institution becomes a symbol of Christ and his church. I'm arguing instead that when God created marriage, he intended it, even in its natural condition, he intended it as a type of Christ and the church. The first Adam and his Eve is already, by virtue of creation, a type of the last Adam and his Eve, the church. I think this is what Paul implies in Ephesians 5. One of the key passages in the New Testament about marriage and male-female relations. I'll start in verse 25. Husbands, love your wife just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her with the washing of water by the word, that he might present to himself the church in all her glory, having no spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and blameless. So husbands ought also to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his own wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as also Christ does the church. So he's developing this typology. A man and a woman in marriage is a type of Christ and the church. And the husband should imitate Christ in the care that he takes for his wife. Christ gave himself for his bride. Husbands should give themselves for their brides. Jesus loves the church as his own flesh. Husbands should love their wives as their own flesh because they're one flesh with their wives. And then verse 31, for this cause a man shall leave his father and mother and shall cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is great, but I'm speaking with reference to Christ and the church. Notice verse 31 is a quotation from Genesis 2. After he's built Eve and presented her to Adam, then he says, the Lord pronounces, for this cause a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, the two shall become one flesh. In Genesis 2, that's referring to the one flesh relation that's going to exist between Adam and Eve. But Paul says, after quoting Genesis 2, he says, this is a great mystery, but I'm speaking about Christ and the church. So he's implying that the quotation from Genesis 2 is already, the one flesh relationship that's created in Eden is already about Christ and the church. It was created to be a symbol of that relation. Karl Barth, I don't know if you've come across his name, he's a 20th century German theologian. Karl Barth, in his discussion of this, talks about the creation of Eve almost as an allegory of redemption. So the creation of Eve has this kind of symbolic overtone to it. And again, it's not that it's not like there's a natural thing out there that doesn't have any theological meaning. It's created with its theological meaning. It's created as a type. And Bart goes through the whole series of events in Genesis 2. It's not good for Adam to be alone. He links that to God's determination that he not be alone. God didn't have to have a creation. He didn't have to have a people, but he determines that he doesn't want to be alone. And so as God created a helper for Adam, so God creates a partner for himself in humanity. A man shall leave his father and mother and shall cleave to his wife. Bart sees that as ultimately as a pointer to the incarnation, because the Son leaves his Father, his heavenly Father, takes flesh so that he can rescue and then become one flesh and one spirit with his wife. Even they were naked and not ashamed, Bart sees as a pointer to the ultimate destiny of humanity. Redeemed humanity will ultimately be in God's presence without shame. And there's a pointer to that already in Eden. You can take that or leave that. I think that's illuminating. I'm not sure that all the connections work, but Bart is basically making the same point I'm making from Ephesians 5, that God created Eve and created male and female distinct, but created them so that they are united, so that they will unite as one flesh. He created them as a representation, a created representation and type of the church and Christ. And what that means is that sexual sin is always an assault on that type and on that symbolic relation between Christ and the church. Or you could put it this way: sexual sin is always some kind of lie about Christ and the church, because marriage and sexual difference and union is created as a type of Christ and the church. Anytime we violate God's standards for sexuality, then we're somehow distorting or assaulting that type. So God created man, male and female, to have sexual relations and sexual union within the covenant bond of marriage. And if you have sex outside of marriage, then there's a kind of defiance of the covenant bond. You're becoming one flesh outside of that covenanted commitment. And that's because sexual union is a type of Christ in the church. It's a kind of lie about Christ and his church, as if Christ would unite himself with his bride outside of a covenant commitment. He doesn't. If you have multiple sexual partners, you play the field. That's, again, a lie about Christ and the church, because your sexuality is supposed to declare the truth about Christ and the church. And Christ has one bride, not multiple brides. He come to rescue that one bride. He's bringing people from every tribe and tongue and nation into one people who will be one united bride. And every time you're playing the field and having multiple sexual partners, that's because sexual union symbolizes Christ and the church, you're telling a lie about Christ and the church. Homosexual acts, again, are a violation or an assault on the image of God in sexual relations. When God created a partner for Adam, he did not create another man. You might think, you've got a big task here. You got to rule the earth and subdue it. He needs another guy. But as one Baptist pastor in the United States used to put it, God did not create Adam and Steve, but Adam and Eve. Okay. He created a female who is like but opposite. That's, again, the phrase, a helper suitable. That Hebrew phrase has a connotation of like and opposite. They're both in the image of God. They share this common reflection of God, but in very different ways. They're like and yet opposite. They're both both human, and they're both in the image of God, and yet they manifest that image in different ways, significantly different ways. Well, homosexual acts, I should say that like opposite, those two different kinds of images of God unite to create a one flesh image of God in the sense that the one flesh is an image of Christ in the church. Homosexual acts violate that. They lie about that. They are an assault on the image in sexual union of a male and a female. Because you have two like beings, two males or two females, who unite sexually. That's a kind of lie about what sexual union is about. One last thing I want to wind this up, and then we're going to have a brief discussion before I move on to the eighth word. In the light of Ephesians 5, I think we can see that sexual fidelity, faithfulness in marriage, obedience to the seventh word, not committing adultery, not being tempted by any sexual sin outside of marriage, resisting that. Sexual fidelity in a covenant bond of marriage is not just a matter of law, but it's a matter of gospel. If you are in a marriage and you're being faithful to your bride in marriage, you're loving your bride as Paul exhorts husbands to, and you're giving yourself for your bride as Paul exhorts husbands to, then you are preaching about Christ and his love for the church. And if your wife, Paul says at the beginning, wives, be submissive to your husbands as to the Lord. If your wife is imitating the church in her relationship to Christ, she's preaching the gospel by showing the church's character. Your marriage is, in your marriages, you're called to be, that marriage is supposed to be a living image of the gospel. The husband showing Christ's character by offering himself for the bride, and the bride submitting to and respecting and honoring, and as Paul says, fearing her husband, showing proper honor. So the seventh word is, I think, all of the Ten Commandments, all the 10 words. All the 10 words are, obedience to the 10 words are manifesting God's character, manifesting the character of Jesus, and in that way are preaching the gospel. I think this is the seventh word in the light of Ephesians 5 it's particularly the case that your sexual fidelity is going to declare Christ to those around you. Your wife's sexual fidelity, your relationship of love and respect in the marriage is going to preach Christ to those who are around you. So the eighth word is thou shalt not steal. I'll outline what I'm going to say. First of all, I want to talk about the relationship between persons and property. I alluded to this a little bit yesterday, but I want to elaborate on that. Secondly, I want to talk about different forms of theft, because theft isn't always breaking into someone's house, accosting them on the street. You can have forms of theft that are kind of built into the way people do business, and the Bible addresses those in various ways. I want to talk about mammon and the idolatry of mammon and how we resist the idolatry of mammon. And then I want to go, as I have been, to the Christological dimension and suggest that the eighth word can be seen as a window, not just on the 10 words, but it's a window on the entirety of the biblical story. The biblical story is about theft and restitution. Okay, first thing, persons and property. I said yesterday when we started the second table, the last 5 of the 10 words, that the sixth commandment, the sixth word, summarizes the last half of the Decalogue. Thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not kill. That's the heading for the last 5 commandments, and all of the last 5 commandments in some way address different forms of assaults or violence, and particularly violence against the image of God. The rationale, as we saw in Genesis 9, for instituting capital punishment for murder is because murder is an assault on the image of God and has to be, the image of God is defended. But as I was saying there at the end of talking about the seventh word, adultery is also, or other sexual sin, are also assaults on the image of God. The image of God that's depicted in sexual relations and sexual union. And various forms of sexual sin undermine that and assault that. Theft is a kind of assault on persons. It's a kind of violence. False witness, as we'll see, is a kind of assault on persons. Coveting is something that takes place internally. It's about our desires, but coveting is a desire to take violence of some sort against persons and property. So that's the background of what I want to say now about persons and property. I don't know if this, I think this is probably characteristic of modern societies in general. I think it's true in the United States in particular, that we tend to distinguish between persons and property and not think of persons and property as bound up with each other. I mentioned yesterday my experience as a teenager with somebody breaking into our home and feeling that as a personal assault. But there are a lot of cultural trends and economic trends in modern societies that work against that identification of property and person. In older societies, the things that you owned would often be inherited from your ancestors. This was true in the U.S., I would guess, up until the early 20th century. If you had a nice bed in your bedroom, you might have inherited from several generations back. And where did it come from several generations back? It was very likely handcrafted. Well, a lot of property in traditional societies is made by the people who own it. So there's a kind of personal investment in the thing that you're making that you don't get when you just go to a store and buy something off the shelf. If you went to a furniture store and bought a bed when you got married, that would have some sentimental value and personal value to you, certainly, because it's associated with you married in some way. But it doesn't have the same kind of personal value that it might have if it were passed down from several generations, or if you built it yourself, or if you have, maybe you have a bowl that you use for salad in your home. If that's something that you made out of clay, there's a personal attachment to it. Or if it's something that your father or grandfather carved out of wood, and you inherit it and you're using it, that's bound up with your attachment to that piece of property is bound up with your affection for and memory of your ancestors. But that's not the kind of world that we live in in the modern world. Things are disposable. I'm always struck by the fact when I go outside the U.S. That I noticed this in the UK even when we lived there when I was doing my PhD. I go for coffee, and I don't get a styrofoam cup or a paper cup for my coffee. I always get an actual cup, as we do here. I mean, do you use styrofoam cups anywhere? If you go to a coffee shop, you use styrofoam cups. Takeaway, right? They don't give you the cup, the ceramic cup when you have a takeout coffee. But in the U.S., if you go to Starbucks, do you have Starbucks in Ethiopia? You know of Starbucks, a huge global coffee chain that started in Seattle. But typically, you go into Starbucks, and no matter whether you're taking out or drinking it in, you get a paper cup that you're just going to dispose of. And disposable things, even if they're not paper or flimsy material like that, disposable things become the norm in mass production societies. You buy things and you don't have any intention of keeping them forever. Even houses. I mean, houses are a big item, and yet Americans typically live in I don't know how many different houses during the course of their adult life. You buy a house. Sometimes it's for the sake of investment. You buy a house, it increases in value. You sell it, you buy a better house. That increases in value, you buy a better house. Or you're mobile. Your work calls you from one city to another, and you're constantly buying new homes. Automobiles, again, a fairly big ticket item, but Americans tend to buy a new automobile every 5 or 6 years. I don't know what the average is, but it's even something as big and expensive as an automobile becomes a disposable object. And there are certain things that, particularly in recent years, certain things that are created and made to be disposable. They have obsolescence built into them. So you buy a some kind of computing device. It's designed to be obsolete at some point because at some point the software that runs it is not going to be available anymore. And the computer that you have is not going to be able to run the latest software. So you have to buy a new computer to keep up with the new software. There's a built-in discardableness, there's a built-in obsolescence in the things that we make. So I think there are things that are opposed to strong attachments between persons and property in modern societies, especially in mass production societies. But still, there is that connection, and we feel it. I mentioned the experience that I had as an illustration of the fact that somebody breaking into our home, my parents' home when I was a teenager, felt like a personal attack on us. It wasn't just entry into the house as an object or an attempt to take things from the house. It felt like a violation. My parents' home got robbed a couple other times when we weren't home. And that time the thieves got something from the house. And that, again, even though we weren't there, thank you, even though we weren't there, it felt like somebody had invaded us, and it was an attack on us. When you think about the other side of this, think about something that you've been saving for. Maybe you've been saving up money for a new computer. You've been saving a lot of money so you can buy a car. You get married, you're saving a lot of money so you can eventually have your own home. And that the purchase of that thing gives you joy. You have joy in ownership. That ownership, in fact, becomes somehow a part of your identity. You are the person who drives a such and such a car. You are the person who lives in such and such a house. And you buy a house and you purchase a car if you're able to afford it that manifests something of your character. You want to buy something that kind of fits who you are if you're able to afford that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think joy in possession is a good thing. We're created to own things. We're created to have property. And that property becomes part of our person in significant ways. And the Bible recognizes that connection between persons and property in a variety of different ways. First, I point you to Exodus 21:16. Exodus 21:16 is the beginning of the section of the Book of the Covenant that's dealing with theft. And it's mainly dealing with theft of property and how restitution is supposed to be made for theft of property. But the first rule doesn't have to do with theft of property, but persons. So verse 16 says, "He who kidnaps a man, whether he sells him or is found in his possession, he shall surely be put to death." The phrase in the Hebrew is actually steals. Man stealing is the way that the Bible describes kidnapping. So persons can be stolen. In fact, the first example of stealing in the Book of the Covenant is not stealing of property, but the stealing of men. So that's one indication scripturally that there's this connection between persons and property, and it's possible to steal, be a thief of people as well as a thief of their property. Secondly, the Bible reiterates again and again that our love and care for our neighbor includes care for his property. We can't say, "I love my neighbor as myself, but I'm careless with his property. I love my next door neighbor. I love my next door neighbor as myself. I have great affection for him. I'm fulfilling the second great commandment. But if he loans me something, I always destroy it and then give it back to him in a condition that can't be used anymore." That's contradictory. If you love your neighbor, you're going to care for his property if it's loaned to you. The Book of the Covenant actually addresses this issue of care for borrowed property. Exodus 22:7. "If a man gives his neighbor money or goods to keep for him, and it is stolen from the man's house, If the thief is caught, he shall pay double. If the thief is not caught, then the owner of the house shall appear before the judges to determine whether he laid his hands on the neighbor's property. For every breach of trust, whether it is for ox or donkey or sheep or clothing, for any lost item, lost thing about which one says, this is it, the case of both parties shall come before the judges, and he whom the judges condemn shall pay double to his neighbor. So somebody gives you something for safekeeping. If it's stolen and the thief is caught, then the thief has to pay double restitution. He has to give back what he stole, and then he's harmed in the same way that he tried to afflict harm. That's the logic behind double restitution. If I take $100 from you, I have to give back $100 so we're even, but then there has to be this loss on my part. I have to give you another $100. I tried to take $100 from you, so I need to have $100 taken from me. Double restitution is the normal rule, apart from some exceptions which I've alluded to. So if there's a thief and the thief is caught, then the neighbor who's taking care of his neighbor's property is not considered as a thief. But notice that there's some obligation. If the thief is not caught, then they have to go before the judges, and there has to be a determination of whether the person who has that property in safekeeping has actually laid his hands on it and taken it himself. There has to be an investigation. So the overall import of this is somebody loans you something, gives you something for safekeeping, then you're obligated to protect it and care for it so that you can give it back to him when the time is done. Or verse 14 of the same chapter, Exodus 22. If a man borrows anything from his neighbor and it is injured or dies while his neighbor is not with it, he shall make restitution. If the owner is with it, he shall not make restitution. If it is hired, it came for his hire. So several different possible scenarios there. One is if he borrows something from his neighbor and it's injured or dies, that obviously he's talking about some living thing. So I'm an Israelite. I borrow this Caleb next door has an ox that's really good for plowing. My ox is kind of old and it's not very strong anymore. So I borrow Caleb's ox and I use it to plow my field. And if that ox is in my possession and it dies in my possession, then I have to make restitution for it. So I should care for my neighbor's ox as I care for my own. That's part of loving my neighbor. I'm not loving my neighbor if I don't give my neighbor's ox the same care, his property the same care as I give my own property. There's distinction between whether the owner is with the property or not. So if the owner is present when the ox dies, then there's a presumption that it's negligence on the part of the borrower. The borrower was not responsible. And if I pay Caleb to hire, let's call him Joshua instead. If I pay Joshua to hire the ox, then I'm covering the cost of something happening to the ox. So if it came with hire, then if it is hired, it came for its hire, and if something happens to it, then the money that I paid him for renting it covers the cost of losing it. My guess is that there would be cases where the borrower would be responsible to make restitution above and beyond the hire. So if I borrow an ox for 10 burr a day and it dies in my care, it's pretty cheap. It's a good deal. If it dies in my care, so I've hired it, but the 10 burr is not going to cover buying a new ox. So I think in justice, I probably owe more than my hire. The assumption of this rule is that the hire is the cost of renting the ox is high enough so that it could cover my neighbor's, Joshua's, ability to buy a new one. Okay. So borrowed property I have to treat with care as my own. Or this, in Deuteronomy. You shall not see your brother's ox or his sheep straying away, and pay no attention to them. You shall certainly bring them back to your brother. And if your brother is not near you, or if you do not know him, then you shall bring it to your home, to your house, and it shall remain with you until your brother looks for it. Then you shall restore it to him. And thus you shall do with his donkey, and you shall do the same with his garment, and you shall likewise with anything lost by your brother, which he has lost and you have found. You're not allowed to neglect them. You shall not see your countryman, your brother's donkey or his ox fallen down on the way and pay no attention to them. You shall certainly help him to raise them up. Okay. So lost property. If you know who it belongs to, you find a dog in your neighborhood and it has a collar on. I've seen some dogs with collars that look like they might have identification tags. I see a lot of dogs that are just wandering freely around the city that don't seem to have owners. But people do have dogs as pets, right? Yeah. So if you see a dog wandering down the street, looks lost, you notice the tag. The tag might have an address for the owner. Loving your brother, loving your neighbor means finding the owner. If you see and you don't know who the owner is, doesn't have a tag, but you know it belongs to somebody, a dog or an animal of some sort, you take it home, and you wait for that person to come to you or post something, lost dog, looking for my lost dog, looking for my lost goat, and when you find that you're owning it, you have to restore it to him. Or the last case, if you're walking along the road and one of your neighbors, one of your brother's animals is fallen down on the road, you don't just keep walking on. You say, I love my neighbor, but I'm not responsible for his fallen animal. You're not loving your neighbor unless you're also caring for his property. Okay, so persons and property are linked together again. Exodus 23, verses 3 and 4 is parallel to it's beyond that, 4 and 5, I guess. Parallel to the passage from Deuteronomy I just read, but pushes it further. If you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey wandering away, you shall surely return it to him. If you see the donkey of one who hates you lying helpless under the load, you shall refrain from leaving it to him. You shall surely release it with him. Okay. Deuteronomy talked about brothers and how you care for the brother's property. Exodus 23 is talking about how you care for the property of an enemy. Exodus 23 is saying in a specific way exactly what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount. You shall love your enemies. Not love your brothers and hate your enemies, but you do good to your enemies even. Okay. So you have to care for property. You can't say you love your neighbor and be negligent about his property. You have to apply the golden rule to your neighbor's property as well as to him. You treat his property the way you want your property to be treated, just as you treat him the way you want to be treated. One other indication in the Bible that there's this connection between person and property, and I think this gets at the theological root of that connection, is the relationship between Yahweh and his property. We've talked about this in a few other contexts this week. Yahweh is a holy God, but Yahweh claims certain places and persons and things as his property. If Yahweh is present in glory in a particular place, that place becomes his. And the way the Bible describes that is that it is holy ground. The tabernacle is a holy house of the Lord. It belongs to him. The priests are holy people. They belong to him in a special way. The stuff inside the tabernacle belongs to God in a special way. And the language that's used in the Old Testament is that those things are holy things. They somehow participate in the holiness of God himself. And just as you're not to violate the holiness of God, you can't violate the holiness of the things that God owns. So there's a relationship this connection between God himself and the things that he owns, the things that he lays special claim to. And you can say analogously, there is a relationship between human beings made in the image of God and the things that we own, the property that we own. As God's holiness somehow infuses the things that he claims, so our character, personality somehow infuses the things that we own. So there's a kind of sacredness to the stuff we have, an analogous sacredness. Okay, that's first point number one under the eighth word. Relation between person and property. They're distinguishable. I should have said this. They're distinguishable in the law too. They're distinguishable not just in our experience, but they're distinguishable in the law. And you can see this in the different way that the Torah treats violations of persons, direct violations of persons, and violations of property. If you kill somebody, you're subject to the death penalty. If you injure them, then you're subject to physical injury yourself. That's the punishment. But if you take their property, you don't get physically harmed. You're not beaten by taking somebody's property. You have to pay it back, and you have to make double restitution. And if you can't make double restitution, then you have some kind of debt that you have to work off, probably in a situation of bond servanthood. But there is a distinction in the way the law treats violations of persons, violations of property. So those things are distinguishable, but they're also intertwined in the various ways I've been describing. They're not absolutely distinct. The second thing I want to talk about is the different ways that the Bible talks about theft. The obvious kind of theft that we think of is you get stuck up on the street, you get assaulted on the street, and somebody asks you for your wallet. Somebody breaks into your house, somebody steals your car. Those are obvious examples of theft. But the Bible addresses other kinds of theft that are more institutionalized and forms of theft that take place under the cover of legitimate economic exchange. For example, several times the Bible forbids, God forbids, unjust weights and measures. We'll look at one example in Leviticus 19:35 and following. You shall do no wrong in judgment, in measurement, in weight or capacity. Notice the connection there. Do no wrong in judgment, it's addressing judges. Don't rule unjustly. And then immediately starts talking about measurement, weight, or capacity. It starts talking about how you're engaging in commerce. You shall have just balances, just weights, a just ephah, a just hin. A hin is a measure of liquid. It's a liquid measure. I am Yahweh, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. You shall observe all my statutes and my ordinances and to do them. I am the Lord. So what's being prohibited? Deuteronomy 25:13 through 16 is another passage. I won't read it, but that's another passage that also deals with unjust weights and measures. What's being prohibited here? In certain economies in the ancient world, there was no such thing as coined money. Certainly no such thing as paper money or plastic debit or credit cards. Exchanges were made by weights. Money would be exchanged as an amount of silver or gold or some other metal, and you would determine the cost of something by weighing it on a scale. But you could defraud somebody in an economic exchange by using weights and measures that the face value was different from the actual value. Okay. So if you're saying, I'm going to sell you a kilo of grain, here's my kilo weight. So I put it on the scales, put the kilo weight on the scales, put grain until they balance out. I sell you a kilo of grain. But actually the weight that I'm using is something less than a kilo. It's not as heavy as an actual kilo. So what I'm actually selling you is not a kilo of grain, but something less than that. But what I'm asking from you as the seller is the price of a kilo of grain. Okay. So I've just defrauded you. I've given you less than a kilo for the price of a kilo, and I've used the weight to defraud you. So that's the kind of scenario where you would have weights and measures that were unjust, that didn't actually match the claimed value, and you could defraud buyers and sell less at the higher price than you should have. Even when coins began to be introduced into ancient economies, Coins, archaeologists find coins that are shaved. You got a silver coin. Silver is very rare and valuable, and so you're tempted as a merchant. You're tempted to shave off the corners. It's hard to tell if you shave off just a little bit, and then you're collecting little bits of silver. If you shave off a bunch of coins, then you've got a weight of silver that you've saved. And then you take the coin out into the marketplace, and you're using that coin to purchase something that costs the amount that's on that coin, but the coin doesn't actually represent that much silver. So as the buyer, you're actually buying more than you are paying for. 1 coin for a kilo of grain, what I'm giving you is something less than a full coin of silver, a full shekel of silver. So coins would also be determined by weight, I think. The British pound was originally a weight, I don't know, of gold or silver, some metal, some precious metal. So both buyer and seller can adjust money, adjust weights, so that they defraud the person they're exchanging with of some of their wealth. They're giving less than they should for the cost that they're getting, or they're giving less than they should in money for the value of what they're purchasing. That's what this law is. That's the kind of dishonesty and fraud that this law is forbidding, and also in Deuteronomy 25, as I said. The Bible repeats that prohibition a number of times, that you're not to do this. Exchanges should be honest exchanges. You should give a kilo of grain for the price of a kilo. You should pay the shekel coin for the amount of grain that corresponds to the shekel. Okay. We don't in modern economies, we don't have this kind of we don't weigh out things. I don't know if that's still done anywhere at all in Ethiopia or Africa, where you're not really working on a money economy, but you're doing some kind of weighing out something on scale. In the city, obviously, you're working with currency, but there's still mechanisms by which you can defraud people by dishonest money. In Western economies, I imagine the same thing happens in Africa as well. But in Western economies, one of the ways that this dishonest money can be institutionalized and ingrained is through inflationary policies. Okay, that is, you have a certain amount of money in circulation. When that amount of money is in circulation, each unit of money has a particular value. Each birr has a particular value, given the number of birr that are in circulation. If the government prints a bunch more birr and infuses the economy with another billion birr, just the principles of supply and demand mean that the birr that you're holding is less value. The thing that indicates this is the prices are going up. We think of inflation as prices rising, which is the effect, though. It can be an effect of a variety of things, but it's usually an effect of supply and demand relationships, and it's often the effect of monetary policies of the government. Okay. Governments have an interest in inflating currency, that is, in devaluing the amount of currency, because every government is in debt to a massive amount. The U.S. debt, I think the U.S. debt is approaching $30 trillion, which is about the size of the U.S. economy. So we owe as much to banks, banks in the U.S., banks in other countries, Chinese banks included. We owe as much debt as we produce, as the economy is valued. I think it's 30 trillion. The number may be off, but there's 31 trillion. Okay, there's a close relation between the amount of debt we have and the value of the economy as a whole. Okay, so why would a government want to reduce the value of dollars? So they borrow dollars at a certain rate. If they devalue the money, then the money that they give back, they're giving the same face value back. Okay, put it simply, I borrow $100, but then there's an inflation, so the $100 is now worth 90. And when I repay my loan, what I'm really repaying is $90 worth of value rather than 100, because the money supply has gone up, which means that the value of the currency has declined. Okay. So this dishonest money is kind of built into modern economies in the way that governments use inflationary policies in order to stimulate growth. You know, when the U.S. economy was lagging because of the COVID pandemic, the government just handed out billions of dollars to people. You got to go buy stuff, keep the economy going, and that's a deliberate policy to increase economic activity, but it has an inflationary effect. Prices go up, the value of your money goes down, and that's a modern form, I think, of this kind of dishonest money from the ancient world. One last thing I'll mention before we take a break, and that is another form of fraud, which comes under the eighth word. It's kind of theft, has to do with the honesty and the truthfulness of what we say in economic transactions. Economic transactions are not simply transactions of goods and services. I pay you a certain amount of money for the stuff you give me. I pay you for certain work that you do for me. Economic transactions are also social interactions, and I think in Ethiopia, my impression is that there's much more of an interpersonal dimension to economic transactions than there tends to be in the U.S. In other words, just the simple fact that for us, virtually all prices are posted, and you don't go into a store, you don't go into a market and negotiate the price of something. You go into market, there's a designated price. You pay that when you get to the cash register. But there's a much more negotiation and verbal exchange, interpersonal exchange that goes on when you're haggling over the price. And particularly in that kind of economy, the truthfulness of your words as a seller, the truthfulness of your words as a purchaser, that's essential to just economic activity. If you have an exchange where the seller knows something is wrong with what he's selling, but hides that, the buyer says, well, this looks like it's not quite right. It looks like it's broken here. Oh no, it came that way. It's supposed to be like that. Or it'll still function, even though it's a little bit off, but it'll still function. Okay, that's defrauding. That's a kind of theft, because you're going to get the money for a functional piece of machinery, let's say. You're going to get the purchase value of a functional piece of machinery, but you're not going to give a functional piece of machinery. You're going to give something else. Or advertising, that's another place. Marketing is another place where honesty and truthfulness is the demand, the scriptural demand. But marketing and advertising often disguises certain aspects of what's being sold. It obviously hypes what's being sold to make it look even more desirable, because you want to attract buyers. So that kind of fraud, verbal fraud in economic transactions, also comes under the eighth word. It is also a kind of theft, and these are the kinds of things that, particularly the last one, honesty in business dealings, are the kinds of things that you'll typically be facing in pastoral situations. You're not going to be dealing with people who are making monetary policy. You'll be dealing with people who have businesses of various sorts, and you want to encourage them in your teaching to conduct themselves in the marketplace as Christian businessmen. And at least, there are a lot of ways that works, but at least it means being honest as a businessman. And there may be cases where you have to rebuke or correct or enter into some kind of disciplinary process with business people in your church who are using fraudulent business practices. Christians should conduct business differently from the world, and as pastors, you're going to be in a position to encourage that kind of Christian economic activity.